Hey, folks, good evening, and thanks for joining me on Phantoms Monsters Radio. I welcome all new listeners and members to the channel, as well as first timers in the chat. So, the primary danger for hunters when encountering a cryptid is the potential for an aggressive, unpredictable animal with unknown behavior and capabilities, as cryptids are creatures whose existence is unverified and often described as large, powerful, and potentially territorial creatures in folklore, meaning they can pose a significant threat if encountered in the wild. So I've collected several accounts where the hunter, not knowing what they were up against, becomes the hunted. Again, please feel free to comment on the accounts and let me know your opinions. So, that being said, let's go ahead and let's get started with the show.
We live in a reality of phantoms and monsters. They exist among us, and sometimes they win. Even the devil was an angel once. The world has its own rules, and these rules are not human. Some of us seek answers to the origin and existence of cryptids and the unexplained. Join us as we venture beyond the known and accepted boundaries. Welcome to our nightmare. I think you're going to like it.
So, before I go any further, I want to mention that this channel is made possible by clicking on the subscribe and like buttons and by you sharing our programming. Now, if you're watching us on YouTube, super chat and super thanks donations are appreciated. You can click the dollar icon located below the chat box. And the Buy Me a Coffee link is also, and other donation links are also shown in the description. So, thanks for your consideration. Now, your comments are always welcome. Tell me which accounts you find interesting in the presentation or suggestions for upcoming shows. I want to again thank our chat moderators, Bernadette, Marla, Thomas, and Mike, for their commitment to me and the channel, as well as Christina and Kevin on ESP Network. Excuse me. Now, if you're in the chat and have a question, please use all caps. I'll try to get to each one of them after the presentation. So, in this first account, a northern New Jersey hunter and fisherman recalls his encounter with Sasquatch on and near his property. Now, he tells me, I'm a 53-year-old and avid hunter, trapper, and fisherman. When I was 12, we had a family visit to Muir Woods National Monument in California. I was obsessed with steelhead. There was a stream full of them right next to the walking path. I left my family to get closer to the fish. I guess I was about 100 yards from my family when I rounded a bend in the stream. I climbed over a rock, and about 30 yards, a guy, which was actually a Sasquatch, was squatted on the edge of the river. We locked eyes, and it seemed like he was trying to kill me with his stare. As he stood up, I couldn't believe how fast he moved. His hair was dark brown, and his face only had hair around the edges. He kept his eye on me as he literally stepped across the creek. I saw grayish hair on his back and muscles like a bodybuilder. The creek was like 20 feet across, and he cleared it in one hop. Now, I could not get out of there fast enough. No one believed my story, not my parents, my brother, or anyone else for that matter. Jump forward to the year 2000. I was married and living in northern New Jersey. I shot a huge buck one morning early, and the arrow seemed to a bit far back. I decided to give him some time. This was November, and I was coaching football at the high school nearby. I went to the game with the intention of tracking the deer after the game. We followed the blood trail about 150 yards to where the deer died. You know what the ground looks like when a killed deer expires. There was 10-foot circle covered with blood and hair. Now, the blood was like someone spilled a 5-gallon pail, but no deer. The bears are huge here, but a bear would have showed on that deer first, then dragged it to a distance and either hit it or left it and come back. There were no drag marks, no blood trail, nothing. But my carbon arrow was broken into uh, little 4 and 5 inch pieces. Now, during turkey season the following year, I was hunting behind my house every morning. There's about a square mile of private land. I kept jumping what I thought was a bear on the edge of the swamp at the base of the steep ridge. It happened several times in the dark. Now, the bear would move up about 50 yards. It was always at first light, and I was hoping to hear the turkeys gobble on the roost. So one morning, I was late getting out, so I was creeping closer than usual. An owl was hooting as I walked. When I got near the area, there was a jumping. I was jumping the bear. I stepped into owl feces. Now, as I did, I heard someone running toward the ridge. It was the thump thump of a 2-legged being. Their feet hit the ground, not the leaf shuffling a bear makes on a run. Then I saw it. It neared the top of the ridge, taking huge strides. As it topped the ridge, all I could see was the same face staring at me from when I was 12. I knew what it was. I haven't slept right since. At our camp, about 20 miles from my home, we had a deer taken from inside of a pickup truck with a cap on it. The T handles of the cap were closed but not locked. Now, whatever took the deer put its hands on the top of the cap and left marks where the hair on its arms had disturbed the dust and the dirt. Now, the guys I was hunting said the bear took it. Now, how many bear can open the cap, walk away with a 100-pound doe, and leave no drag marks or evidence? So one Saturday after deer season ended, I was driving at night at about 10 p.m. I came across a 6-inch tree across the road that was just wide enough for one truck. I had just been there a few hours before in daylight. I got out to move the tree and it was twisted. It had been twisted around 5 foot off the ground and bent over the road. As I stood and looked at it, I felt like I was being watched. I had that feeling of impending doom sweep over me. They did not want me there, so I jumped in my truck and got the hell out of there. I'm never going to stop what I love to do most, which is hunting and fishing. But it's not the same as it once was. You know you're not alone out there. There's something about knowing that you're not the top dog in the woods. They walk around my house at night in the summer. When I'm out hunting, they're here and no one wants to admit it. Now, the BFRO idiots were more concerned about having me pay $400 to get into their freaking expedition than come up and see the area where I live. So as soon as I said they were human like and not ape, they dismissed me like I never existed. And I can attest to that type of attitude from BFRO. A central Mississippi resident recalls his harrowing experience with a black panther, as well as the mimics and other activity of a possible Bigfoot while hunting on his family's property. Now, he tells me, this encounter occurred on my family's property about 20 years ago. It's 15 miles east of Greenwood, Mississippi. Now, during deer bow season, I had a nice food plot set up in the woods about a half mile from the nearest house. Now, these small plots give the deer something to eat and an easy escape route to the trees. It made them feel comfortable. I had a tree stand set up on the edge of the field. Now, after being in the stand for about 15 minutes, I see what I think is a large Labrador retriever enter the opposite end of my food plot, heading towards me. Now, as it approached, I quickly realized that it wasn't a dog. It was a black panther. paws are massive. I was amazed and scared at the same time. It was already in a standing position. It approached my stand, so I drew back when I got close to the base. When it got close to the base of the tree, when I drew it, I looked. It looked up at me, but it never stopped moving as it passed my position. I decided not to shoot because I thought that I stood a better chance of getting out of there alive by leaving it rather than potentially wounding a deadly predator. I also recall that my grandfather had told my uncles that the big cats were there many years ago. Now, this cat was about 7 foot long. That's the body length of approximately 5 feet. It showed no fear of me and almost acted like it knew me. Now, I'd hunted this wood since I was a young teen. I stayed in the stand until it was dark and then I got down. I thought it would be the best for me to follow the panther's route to ensure that he was gone. So I walked about 50 yards on the trail that I saw him follow. Then, in the glow of my flashlight, I saw green eyes shine, and then his head extended out from behind an oak tree. I stopped and notched an arrow, then stepped backward until I made it up the open field that was on top of a hill. I put my arrow back in the quiver and ran half a mile to my truck. I took a day off during the week to do some turkey hunting. Now, I got a late start, but I had a good idea where I needed to go for the late morning hunt. I set my turkey decoys up in an opening that had two trails running perpendicular to my position. I sat in the corner and against a large oak tree. I chilled for a few minutes to see if anything would sound off. I tried to call an owl call. Immediately, an owl called back just a short distance in front of me and then another to my left. The calls responding were too loud and from two separate animals. Now, this was not an owl. It was something mimicking an owl, and it was something with big lungs. I packed my gear and headed for the truck. That hunt was over. The next winter, I took my son and uncle in there for a quick squirrel hunt. My son was little, but wanted to get him exposed to the woods. We started hearing trees being pushed over in a distance, and I asked my uncle what he thought it was. He didn't have a clue, and then we got the hell out of there. Again, this hunt was over as well. I did some research after those events, and I learned that others had posted sightings of Bigfoot creatures and similar behavior on the Mississippi BFRO page. I never saw the creature, but I'm certain that something was there. Now, this next witness states in 1999 in the spring, I was bear hunting with a buddy. Now, this was in British Columbia. We hunted for spring bear for about 10 years. Now, most years we would punch two tags each and we'd enjoy sausage from the meat. My favorite is pepperoni and garlic oil. Now, this was a sunny spring afternoon heading west on the Beaver Bear Road east of Prince George, British Columbia. We saw a tall, lanky black bear happily shuffling towards us on the right side of the road. This animal had a beautiful dark chocolate, nearly black, long, shiny, healthy coat of hair and a white star of hair on its chest. We stopped our vehicle and I got out. I got low and centered the crosshairs on the brisket. It was a perfect head-on shot at 30 yards or less. Now, I use an 180 grain 300 Win Mag round. I saw the impact. The animal both turns to the ditch at the right and flips/rolls in the air, dropping out of sight. We both move in and nothing. No bear. The forest road had an 18-inch high or greater berm on the edge and dropped 4 to 5 feet to the marshy area that was heavily covered in the prickly low brush, which covered porous ice about 3 to 4 feet thick. The animal should have been right there in the ditch, dying or dead, and it was not. Not even a drop of blood. No tracks. There was a very clear view of 100 yards around this spot. We both were experienced enough to know where it should be, but nothing. It was as though this thing evaporated into thin air. I even checked the culvert, but it was an 18-inch pipe that was two or three thirds filled up with ice. I called back to my buddy who found a tuft of hair on the road. It was unusual hair. It even had a mix of white hair in it. There was no blood, no tracks. This bear had simply vanished. The hair confirmed to me that my shot hit its mark. I had practiced often in those days, including at point blank. It seemed practical to me to do so. A shot and seemingly dead bear could jump up as you move in close. I had been practiced turning the rifle sideways to the sight alongside the barrel for accurate up close shots. This practice was recommended to me by a friend who was a professional guide for my dad's outfit. The entire event was unusual. The bear did seem oblivious to our approach. It also seemed to be happily shuffling a long leg if a bear could skip and hop like a kid does. Now, the back of it was easily 4 to 5 foot off the ground. I would like to hear your response. Well, according to the description of the bear's demeanor, it's possible that, and I don't know how you're going to take this, but it's possible it could have been a time slip or an interdimensional scenario. Um, is it possible that this hunter was peeking into another dimension of reality where the bear had existed at the time? Now, he described seeing the bear reacting to the gunshot strike. Now, if it was in another dimension, there shouldn't have been any visual reaction by the bear or evidence of hair. So, did the bear somehow enter into another dimension after receiving the gunshot? Very bizarre encounter. Now, this next account, the witness states, this incident occurred about 7 years ago when I was in my late teens on a muzzle loaded mule deer hunt in the far northeastern part of Utah. Now, this area contains some of the most remote places in the state. I've been frequently out in this area, spreading in Summit County that cuts in and out of lower Wyoming since before I can remember. Includes lots of hiking, backpacking, camping, hunting, and being involved in some of my grandfather's work. I am skeptical of things not proven by methods of science, but I don't deny all those things. I find that it's impossible for science to know all that is out there in this vast world. Now, my grandfather was a recently retired biologist and former conservation officer for the state and was a regional specialist and was over wildlife and habitat management for many years. He did everything from habitat management programs to quite literally wrangling moose to be transplanted at darted black bears. He had seen mountain lions, bears, birds of all kinds, small mammals, plants, natural phenomena most of his life, and he understands so much that many people, including myself, will never be able to even imagine. He's scientific, honest, straightforward, level headed. He's agnostic and is not superstitious, and often used to teasing a certain CO who thinks Bigfoot skinwalkers and other beings exist. Now, other than this experience, he had never encountered an animal that he could not at least partially identify. And other than the natural innate fear of being in close quarters with a bear, a drunken, belligerent hunter, or incredibly potent tranquilizer medication, he's told me over and over he's never been terrified of any animal or experience like this, only curious or surprised. So, it was late September, and we were in a small camp by a lake in the high Unita Mountains, hunting both grouse and mule deer with muzzle loaders. The camp was a small collection of men and women my grandfather had worked with over the years as a supervisor and biologist. And these were people I grew up with. One of the women, a new wife to one of the guys, had shot a buck deer, injuring but not killing it immediately, and they had lost track of it. Devastated by the thought of wasting the animal, she returned to camp in the afternoon, upset and concerned that the deer had run into an even more secluded area of the mountain which was hard to reach from the trail that she had shot from. It was a place my grandfather was familiar with because it was such a pain to get to with lots of deadfalls and steep terrain. We volunteered to go in the late afternoon to search for the deer, following a scant blood trail that she had tracked for a while before getting fatigued and intimidated by the terrain. Because both my grandfather and I were in good shape and he was so familiar, it didn't seem like a big deal. Now, before we left, we mentioned a hearing that we assumed were coyotes, which made her even more so concerned that if the deer died, they would ruin the meat and hide before they could harvest it. So we took off in the early evening, expecting to be back within an hour or two after searching and having our guns with us in case we found the animal still alive or came across another buck worth trying to harvest. It was steep in places and lots of deadfalls of varying heights, making the hike slower and more tedious than we had hoped, making us understand the other hunters' fatigue. We had marked the blood trail with bright orange pieces on the trees, which we followed for maybe 20 minutes, and then it got hard to track. The sun was getting close to setting at this point, and we knew getting out would be just as long as getting in. We had just about decided to stop when we found a spot near a fallen tree that looked like it had been freshly bedded down in, followed by spatters of fresh blood, and we continued for a bit longer. When the sun had just set and the light had faded from the trees, we removed the firing caps from our guns to make them now completely safe, as it was now illegal and irresponsible to hunt in such absence of decent light. Now, my grandfather pulled out his large Maglite flashlight from his pack, and I put it in my headlamp to begin the hike back, using our GPS to find a trailhead. About 10 minutes on the way back, we started to hear more movement among the trees. It was normal for animals to start moving now that the sun had gone down, as animals would likely be starting to head towards the clearings for water or to graze in the safety of the lower light. Small and distant sounds of crunching leaves, pattering of hooves of animals, or small bits of movement in the trees from squirrels or birds were common and expected. We did not expect the deafening, disturbing sound we heard next, which vaguely and initially reminded me of a coyote howl, but by the few seconds in it was unidentified and unidentifiable, frightening, and human like. It started with what sounded like a person screaming, but then got louder and more intense with a screech to it. So, unlike any coyote or any animal you ever heard. Then there was an almost chittering that came in between the shrieks, and the movement of the trees becoming more calculated, almost threatening. We stopped dead in our tracks, frozen as my grandfather started using the light to look around. I was far more freaked out than him at this point. He just seemed perplexed, curious, and a little baffled at what could make that sound. It sounded human, but with no words, with no urge of tone of help or I'm just screaming to mess with you. We continued after it almost mostly stopped. Excuse me. We continued after it mostly stopped and seemed like the other natural and distant sounds had gone almost silent. I listened intently to the sounds of my boots crunching with the dry aspen leaves underfoot, trying to tell myself that it was just some weird coyote with a horribly deformed larynx or something. So maybe 20 minutes after the main trail that would lead us to the truck, we heard the chittering sound again and the sounds of thumping against dead trees. Looking around with our lights, in between deadfall, maybe 12 to 15 foot in front of us, was a large human like thing. It was almost hunched down with a long, slender arm around the front of of a standing aspen. The aspen, of course, was pale white, with the knots being dark brown, and whatever it was had skin almost as pale. I caught a very brief glimpse of its face. It seemed round, and the eyes seemed sunken, and I could not tell you eye color other than the flash of reflection on the eye from my light, and its face seemed sunken and emaciated. I didn't see any fur or hair. I never felt like it looked right at me. More my grandfather and just in our direction, almost confused and curious, like it was before the sound. Now, for a mere couple seconds, I caught a glimpse of it, but that was it. I looked down at the ground, holding my eyes shut tight, trying to imagine being safe and secure in the truck. And my grandfather took a few stumbling steps backwards towards me. Now I heard the thing go off to our side, moving quickly with purpose through the trees to the side, and then drop down behind us. I would assume according to the sound, but I hope it went in the opposite direction. Now my grandfather turned to where it had veered off as to follow it, but he soon stopped and looked at me. I had never since seen him so confused, baffled, horrified, and curious, and in awe. I was crying at that point, ugly crying, trying to muffle my shaking teeth and voice. And I asked him, "What was that?" Over and over, I asked, and he had no answer for me. He pulled his gun off his shoulder and put a cap back on the nipple of the igniter, making the gun live, and he then carried it in front of his body in his arm. We pulled out another headlight to put on himself. He pulled out another headlight to put on himself. We started walking again towards the trail. As he listed off as like talking to himself, as this thing couldn't have been a deer or elk or moose. Its hard arms, it was hunched, it stood upright, or a bear, a very sick bear. It couldn't have been a bear. Was it the light? We heard the sound in the screeching human howl distantly again before reaching the trail, which was dirt and gravel but flat and with no deadfall. We practically jogged to the truck. I locked the doors immediately and sobbed. My grandfather turned on the music as loud as possible to try to distract me on the way back to the camp. I was a mess when we arrived back, and we went to talk with the others by the fire when he got me settled in my sleeping bag in the bunk. He explained some to his friends, but I don't know what all was said. Now the next day, everyone was extra sweet to me, trying to comfort me and saying it was probably a sick animal that looked scary in the dark. Now, the deer the hunter shot was found the next day in the daylight, scavenged quite harshly by what I assume were coyotes. Now, to this day, he has no clue what it was, nor what that sound was. And before and since, and I've heard both coyote and many other animal sounds that never even compared to that sound. Now, the scientist in me and in him, the hopeful and the blissfully ignorant people in us hoped and speculate it was just a deformed, sick animal in scant life. But I still had no clue of what it was. And I hope I never ever experience it again. Now, it was probably a pale crawler. Um, I get more and more hunters coming forward talking about the pale crawler sightings, which, quite frankly, up to a decade ago, we never got. Now, why these things are being seen and reported now in the past decade or so, I don't know. It's still, even though I wrote a book about it, I still don't understand what these things are. So, but I think that's what they encountered. Anyway, this next witness states this happened when I was about 12 years old to my uncle. He's no longer with us, and I want to share his story. Now, growing up, I lived in Michigan's Upper Peninsula on 5,000 acres of farm ranch land that backed up into state land. Nothing but miles of forest and pasture could be seen. It, it made us tough. It takes a lot to spook us. We are all avid hunters, fishermen, and outdoorsmen. Being the only girl, I was raised as a tomboy. I'm just the same. My uncle went off to join the military, became a senior NCO in a prominent Special Forces division of the U.S. Navy. He was 6'4", built like a wrestler, and obviously skilled in survival tactics, and nothing rattled him. Now, he was home on leave and went out hunting as it was deer season. I I remember him coming into the house shaking and crying, saying he saw something in the woods. My uncle never cried. He was tough as nails and would tear someone to shreds before he let them make him cry. My grandmother tried to get him to make sense, but he kept saying he saw Bigfoot mixed with a wolf. My granny immediately got my grandfather and he rounded up the rest of the guys hunting. My dad and a few male cousins and my uncle, who was still terrified but went because he didn't want to be labeled a chicken, got all their shotguns and ammunition and saddled the horses to go clear the woods. Now, apparently, they were aware of the dog man, but I was blissfully young and ignorant. They told me to stay inside, and for no reason was I to step outside of our house until we returned. Now, I never heard my dad or grandfather so serious, so I hid in my room. Sunset comes, and they still aren't back. I'm really worried at this point because they never stayed in the woods until after dark. Shortly, I heard the horses running to the barn and their voices. I was so relieved. They looked troubled when they came into the house, but didn't say anything, probably to not to spook me. At dinner, my dad laid down the law, and I was no longer allowed to play outside or go to the barn alone. I had to always have my grandfather with me. Of course, I was upset by this and felt my independence was being taken away, but I obeyed. The next morning, my dad and grandfather taught me how to shoot. I knew it was serious. Now, I overheard the adults talking the next night. Apparently, there were tracks where my uncle had this sighting, bigger than a wolf could make, but they were dog tracks. Now, as I said before, we are avid outdoorsmen and hunters, and we can identify tracks easily, but these couldn't be identified. About 8 foot up in a tree were claw marks. No Michigan bear can make those. We also found claw marks of about the same height on multiple trees throughout our property. There were cattle mutilated as well, and not in a way a coyote and bear would, and it lasted the whole winter. We lost about 30 to 40 cattle that winter, all of them mutilated, all with the same wolf dog tracks in the snow. I really feel like this experience changed my uncle. Who knows? He did multiple tours in the Middle East for Desert Storm and Operation Iraqi Freedom before he committed suicide. Now, after that experience, though, he was never the same. He went from not ever drinking to never seeing him without a bottle of Jack Daniels, and his eyes were always haunted looking. He changed his he changed his personality and never went out in the woods again. He quit hunting and he eventually quit coming home to visit on leave. He didn't even come home for my dad's funerals 2 years later. It was heartbreaking to see him deteriorate the way he did. I truly believe he saw something out there and it ultimately killed him. Now, over the years, there have been a lot of witness reports coming out of Michigan's Upper Peninsula of the infamous Michigan Dog Man. Um, it's not just in the Upper Peninsula. Northern Michigan also has a lot of sightings, but of course, we get a lot of sightings in the Upper Midwest. So, did he see a dog man? I don't know. An upright canine subtype? Who knows? Now, a First Nations man told his grandson about an incident where he encountered a winged alien in a tree. After shooting the being and watching it fall, there was never any trace of it found. So the witness states to me, my grandfather was a real badass. He was born in Alberta, Canada during the early 30s and raised his three brothers on a reservation from the time he was 9. This was after his parents left for British Columbia with their only daughter, promised to return, and none of the boys ever saw them again. To make ends meet, he learned carpentry and worked as a laborer and bare knuckled box against older men for extra cash. He learned how to track and hunt and always came home with something to eat when work was scarce. When he was 14, he put the second oldest brother in charge of the household, left the res in search of his parents and a better life, and never went back. That was the last time he saw any of his family members. He spent several months riding the rails, befriending some transients while using his fighting skills to defend himself against others. He eventually made his way to Vancouver, the last known whereabouts of his parents and sister, and started working in a pulp mill. At 17, he met my grandmother, and the two eventually married, leading him to giving up his search for his family. They bought some land, and he spent his free time building several houses, which still stand today. One of those sat on the land he bought with my grandmother, which included acres of wooded area. On this land, my grandparents kept horses and small farm animals for eggs and meat. Now, my aunt was born in the early 50s, and then my mother came along right after the end of the decade. As far as I've heard, nothing bad or strange ever happened until my mom found an old Ouija board and played it by herself. But I don't know if it has any relation to the story. Now, my mother was around 8 when she was riding her horse through the wooded area of their acreage when the horse stopped dead in its tracks. My mom tried to spur it on, but was frozen in fear, and suddenly she smelled something like rotting garbage and meat. She pulled back on the reins, and the horse instantly turned and took off back towards the house, almost knocking her off its back several times along the way. Afterwards, that horse was never the same. It would try to kick her, and if she got on it, it would fall backwards, trying to crush her beneath it. Once it started acting like its old self again, letting her climb onto it. But once she did, it ran towards the road and stopped abruptly, bucking her forward into the path of an oncoming car. My grandpa saw it happen and put a shotgun to its head, and the horse just kept breathing heavily and staring straight ahead. My mother barely missed being run over by a car that saw the horse coming and managed to swerve out of the way. And my grandmother begged my grandfather not to shoot the horse. He finally decided to give it away, and when he saw my mother wasn't badly injured, that same horse fell on the next person to that same horse fell on the next person to ride it, breaking her collarbone. And my father did what my grandpa said he should have done in the first place. So after that, animals started going missing, and one of the hunting dogs was injured by something during an attack at night. And my grandpa set up some traps and stayed in the hayloft above the barn with a shotgun and rifle beside him and slept out there for several nights. He figured it was foxes or maybe coyotes or wolves or even a desperate bear, which is what he attributed the smell in the woods to and the horse's reason for losing its mind. But nothing came the entire time he slept out there, and eventually he figured it had moved on to easier prey or just died. The day after he stopped sleeping in the barn, my mom was out near the tree line playing with the injured dog as it was healing. Out of nowhere, the dog started sniffing the air, then positioned itself between my mom and the trees, growling and barking. My grandpa heard the noise and came out, stopped in his tracks, and called back to my grandmother to bring his rifle, then whistled for the dogs. My grandma came out, handed him his gun, and asked what was going on. As the dogs all started to react like the first one, my grandfather pointed to one of the treetops, which looked longer and thicker than those around it, but it was very slightly moving. It was at least 6 feet tall. He told me later that he'd retell the story, but probably a good bit taller. He took aim and fired just as he saw a pair of wings start to open. Whatever it was watching them, but he beat it to the punch. It was a kill shot directly in the chest with a high-powered rifle, and he instantly started running forward with all the dogs following him as this thing plummeted to the ground. The break in the tree branch wholly unmistakable. When he reached the impact point, he raised his rifle and again commanded the dogs forward to flush it out. But they all just stood in the spot and kept spinning around trying to catch a scent what was seemingly disappeared. A pile of broken branches lay in an obvious landing spot, but beyond that, there was no proof anything had happened. No body, no blood, no trail. It had either disappeared or gone straight back the way it came. He searched those woods for several days, but never found a sign of what that thing was. And they didn't see it or experience issues with the animals after that. Decades later, when he was dying, he kept talking about how he saw something. In his delirium, he referred to it as an alien, but said it was coming back for him. I've never seen that man scared of anything in my life, but there was actual panic and fear in his voice. A few nights before he died, he had already been too weak to stand on his own for several days, and my grandmother awoke to the sound of a gunshot. She ran outside, fearing no worst, and saw my grandpa lowering his rifle, staring at something in the distance. She took the gun away and helped him back inside, and that was it. I don't know if whatever it was, what it was, actually did come back for him, or it was an hallucination, an old memory. But I'd like to think he went out with his final "fu" to the thing that tried to torment his family all those years ago. So, folks, that's it. Uh, if you have any questions about anything, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I will get to them. We do have a super chat. Thank you to Real Truth. Happy New Year, Lon. 24 days late, but better late than never. I appreciate that. Thanks very much. Real Truth. The people who have controlled our reality for thousands of years is coming to an end. A new paradigm of love and giving instead of one of hate and taking. I believe that. I think people are becoming much more open to the unexplained as well. So, yeah, I do believe that. Granzier 12. Lon, love your work. Heard your interview when you had Mac Maloney on your stream. Any chance of getting him back on? I enjoyed his Wingman book series. I'll see what I can do. I haven't talked to Mac in years, so I'll see what I can try and do to get him on. And I see the question up there asking me where David Eckhart is. Please tell me. I can't tell you. It's he asked me not to state anything. He's still around, but it's personal, and I don't wanna say anything about it, so there you go. Dagnabbit, what area in North America was the most concentrated sighting of pale crawlers? Honestly, it's been everywhere. I can't really say even after writing the book, I can't really say there was a specific area or location where these things have been more prominent. I do we have had a lot of sightings in Pennsylvania. I will say that, and I've had a lot of sightings all over the state. Even Stan Gordon has mentioned to me that people are reporting these things to him as well. So there you go. Kevin Emery, what do you think of all the upcoming disclosures on ETs? I don't know what to think. You know, I I don't get too riled up in the possibility of disclosure. I've seen it to a certain degree before, but I really don't believe we're going to be given much information until it's actually absolutely needed to know. I mean, needed to be out there. Um, I may put together something eventually concerning the possibility of disclosure and some of the things I've investigated over the years as well. But yeah, I don't know what to make of it. Jose Sanchez, the fact that people are taking up more spaces of animals could be why there are more encounters these days. That's entirely possible. The habitat has absolutely decreased. And it does seem a lot of these animals that were hesitant to come into property are not so much now. Now I don't know why that is, but it does seem that way. Kevin Emery, could the cryptids be hunting themselves with so many hunters seeing them? Uh, maybe. I can't really give much of a positive answer to that, but I suppose it's possible. Um, but the sightings have increased. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. And everybody I've been talked to has been associated with his colleagues and investigators are saying the same thing. So, you know, 2004 was a busy year, and I don't know how 2005 is going to shape out, but the past year and a half, we've been pretty busy, so we're getting a lot of reports. Not necessarily a lot of explanation, but we're getting a lot of reports. Thanks for letting us know. No problem. It was about David. Yeah, no problem. That's the best I can do. I wish I could tell you more. It's a private thing, and I don't want to. I don't want to go against what he asked me not to do. So, but he's okay. Anything else, folks? Okay. Well, again, I want to thank each and all of you for watching and chatting. If you donate, it's truly appreciated. Your support's what makes all this possible. Please like, subscribe, and share. And if you have a sighting or encounter report that you'd like to be considered for the personal report show, or post on Phantoms and Monsters, just forward to me at my email at Lon Strickler, phantomsandmonsters.com. So until next weekend, or next Friday night, that is, stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll do this again next Friday night. So take care.